We're beginning a new series in Proverbs, and I thought it would just be really helpful before we start and get into the detail of it to do a little overview of wisdom and what to expect as we dive into Proverbs. So firstly, what is wisdom? I think there are 6 things that I want to say about wisdom. Firstly, it's about know-how. If you imagine a craftsman, somebody who spent a long time learning how to do something really well, and over the years they've gained the tools necessary to do the job, and they've made sure that they really would excel in it. That's the way the writer of Proverbs sees wisdom. It's like a craft, an ability that you develop over time. And they use, for example, agricultural images to help us understand that. So 27:18 says, "Whoever tends a fig tree will eat its fruit." Or 27:23 says, "Know well the condition of your flocks and give attention to your herds." It's obvious, isn't it? If you want to grow fruit trees in your garden and have fruit, then you need to tend those trees. You need to know what you're doing to enable them to thrive and flourish. It's the same too if you have a flock of sheep. If you don't know how to look after them and care for them and protect them, then they're not going to flourish. And they're saying wisdom is like that. Wisdom is something that, like a craft, you need to develop, you need to grow, you need to understand. And of course, it's not just the task you do. Proverbs touches the whole of life, and it says you need to be skilled. You need to be skilled to navigate your way through life wisely so that you make good decisions rather than poor, that you're not held back and you're not having to pay years later for decisions that you made that were not good. So it's like a craft, it's know-how. Wisdom is about helping you to navigate through life. Wisdom is about instruction. I don't know whether you're around teenagers, do you remember what you were like as a teenager? I certainly remember kind of being told things by my dad going, yeah. Actually trying to drown out what he was saying, really, rather than agreeing with him. And Proverbs says, what kind of person are you? Are you somebody who welcomes instructions, who welcomes people helping them how to live well? So, for example, chapter 13, a wise son hears his father's instruction. A scoffer doesn't listen to rebuke. The scoffer is one of the caricatures that you have in Proverbs of people who are not wise, who don't learn. And when they say, look, the scoffer's ridiculous, they make a mess of things and they just don't learn, which means they'll carry on doing it again and again and again. That's not wise. Chapter 23, listen to your father who gave you life and do not despise your mother when she is old. It's also relational, isn't it? It's knowing who to listen to, when to listen to, how to care for people who do have more experience, who do have more wisdom, who are able to speak to you. And a fool despises his father's instruction, chapter 15, but whoever heeds reproof is prudent. What they're saying is actually wisdom is about helping you to live life well, to live in control of your life, to be self-controlled. Interesting, isn't it, that in the New Testament, self-control is one of the fruits of the Spirit, an example of godly living. It's here too in Proverbs. It's actually, if you live well, if you do things well, then that's wise, and you will have a better life for it, and you will honour God through it. Wisdom is discerning. We live in a world, don't we, where we're surrounded by influencers. If you're on social media, if you watch any television, there are always people who are telling us what to do. You go into a bookshop, if you can still find one of those, and you'll find that the self-help page, the self-help shelves, is one of the largest sections in a bookshop. Of course, they're not self-help. They're people telling you how to do things. And the crucial thing is that for us as Christians is, are we discerning? Are we listening to the right voices? Chapter 16, there is a way that seems right to a man, but its way leads to death. What they're saying is that, that things might look good to begin with, but actually, do you have the wisdom to discern whether this is a good long-term option? That actually it's something that will ensnare you rather than free you? Or this one, do not put yourself forward in the king's presence in chapter 25, or stand in the place of the great. It's saying actually wisdom is knowing yourself too, knowing what you can and can't do. Don't actually let yourself be in a position where you're giving advice. Here it gives the example of a king, but to a friend or to a work colleague. Don't do things that you know that you can't do, because it'll end up coming back to bite you. You'll look foolish. This is not wise. We need to be discerning. And of course, there are all kinds of things that are thrown out, people who will influence us, or all kinds of people who say this is how you should live, this is the kind of way you should deal with your money, these are the kinds of friends you have. And Proverbs is saying, are you wise in those decisions? Wisdom, fourthly, is dealing well. It's not just about the actions we do, but it has a moral dimension to it. So that it's not just doing well, it's dealing well. I like that kind of that interplay there. Doing well means that you yourself are doing well, irrespective of how anybody else is doing. But dealing well, and I know this from my time in the stock market, is making sure that when you do a deal, everyone's happy with it, so that they come back and they want more, rather than actually, oh my goodness me, you've completely fleeced me, and I'm not going anywhere near you again. And so what it's saying is, you work with people, you deal with people in a moral way, which means that it's good for both of you. And some of that, the illustrations in Proverbs, is given from the market. Chapter 20, unequal weights and unequal measures are both alike an abomination to the Lord. It's saying, look, actually it is important how you do things. Have a pride in your work. Take responsibility for the things that you do to make sure that they are done well. But more than that, listen to this from chapter 18. I always get this one wrong. It's not good to be partial to the wicked or to deprive the righteous of justice. It's actually saying, look, it's about who you relate to, who you hang out with. You need to be discerning in that too, because there are some people that will take you to the road of ruin. But also, don't avoid people that need things from you. Don't deprive those who are poor of the justice that they deserve. It says actually, don't just do well, deal well. Make sure that those around you value you and have a good opinion of you, and therefore they will see God at work in you. But making sure too that in your business, in your homework, in the different things that you're doing, that you do things with integrity and honesty. Fifthly, wisdom is worldly wise, what the French call savoir-faire. I know how to do things. It's interesting, yesterday in the bishop's sermon at Sarah Jane's licensing, her ordination rather, that he talked about the serpent in the garden. And he talked about it. And interestingly, Jesus picks that up when he says in the New Testament, he says, you need to be as gentle as doves, but as wise as serpents. What does he mean? The serpent in the garden in Genesis 3 is the father of all lies. But I think what Jesus is saying is not that we need to be lying, on the contrary. But also notice how the serpent is astute. It knows the weak points. It knows exactly what needs to be said at any particular time. And that's, in a sense, what worldly wisdom is making sure that actually we're not just so above ourselves or so spiritual, actually, that there's no connection, that we negotiate a broken and fallen world wisely. One of the characters that we'll meet in Proverbs is Madame Folly. Wisdom is personified as a woman, but also so is folly, and she's a tempter, a seductress. And in chapter 9, we hear one of Madame Folly's speeches. Whoever is simple, let them come in here. To them who lack sense, she says, the simple believes everything. You can see that, and It's just making sure that we are aware, in a sense, that we're not simple, that we're not gullible, we don't just be taken in by the first thing. The prudent, chapter 9 says, gives thought to their ways and to their steps. So it's that, we live in a world that's going to ask all kinds of things, actually, and sometimes we're kind of thrown by it. Wisdom says, don't be. Prepare for this. Make sure that you're wise. And Proverbs also says that wisdom is knowing what to say. I love this. There's a kind of a trading illustration here from chapter 26. Bad, 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 says the buyer. But when he goes away, he boasts about what he's just done. Well, of course, if you're haggling at a market stall, you're not going to say, oh, that looks really good. Oh, that's really, really nice. You're going to try and drive the price down. You're going to say, oh, well, actually, I'm not sure that I need that. Or actually, I think there's a better one over there. You find ways of working so that you get a good deal. But of course, the moment you've gone from the deal, then you're saying to everybody else, look at the good deal I've got. And it's not condemning this or saying this is good. It's just observing that if you know how to speak well, then you get what you want. But contrast this with the sluggard. I love the sluggard. It's one of my favourite characters in Proverbs. There is a lion in the road. There's a lion in the streets. Well, of course, the sluggard doesn't want to get up and do anything, so any excuse will do. Who's going to believe them? But of course, that's what they say, and they don't realise when they're trying to avoid things that actually they're just making it worse, because everybody knows that it's not true. Everybody knows that they're just trying to avoid things, but they're not good enough to realise. They're not wise enough to realise that actually what they say is being laughed at by others. There's a whole section we're going to come back to speaking that looks about it. But it's really, really important that we think carefully about what we say. And of course that applies too, doesn't it, to when we talk about Jesus. Have we thought carefully what we might say to somebody? So actually if somebody says to us, what did you do at the weekend? You don't suddenly think scrabbling around, oh, how do I tell them I go to church? How do I tell that my faith in Jesus is real? Actually, I've thought about the things that I might want to say if those questions are asked. We know as teenagers, don't we, that and if you've got teenagers, we make them do exam question time and time and time again so that they faced all kinds of questions and they know how to answer them. Wisdom and Proverbs says, actually, that's not just for school days, that's for all of us. We need to think and prepare about what we're going to say. We're wise in our speaking. So that's a little bit of an overview of some of what we will see in and what wisdom is in the book of Proverbs. Just now I want to touch on why wisdom is so important for us. Chapter 1 verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. I'm sure that if you knew one verse from Proverbs, that was possibly it. Another one that I'm going to refer to in a minute. And the fear of the Lord is really, really important because what it tells us is that Proverbs is about an attitude of the heart. It's so easy just to think that Proverbs is a list of really good worldly advice. It's another self-help book. But it's not. It's about, in a broken and fallen world, living rightly with God and for God. And so it's about shaping our hearts. It's about what's in us. And what's in us then impacts in the way we are. We'll see that in a moment. But what it's saying is, look, if this is God's world and God has created us to live in this world, then the best way to live is the way that God has asked us to do, has asked us to live, and also teaches us to live. Let's listen to him. It's like saying that, we've got some Lego, and we've got lots of Lego in a box when people come around, and when they say, well, how do you put it together? Say, well, actually, I've got some Brio instructions here for the train set. Well, that's just not going to help, is it? Because actually, you need the right instructions to be able to make the right things. And Proverbs says this is what God is like. He wants to help us live appropriately and rightly in his world. But it starts with a heart. The fear of the Lord, what's going on inside. But also Proverbs recognises that we live in a world that's countercultural, a world that rejects God, that wants to have its own wisdom and its own way of doing things. And so 3 verse 5 says this: trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. I'm sure again that's a verse that you are very, very familiar with and will have heard lots. And what it's saying is, look, to be a Christian, to follow God, is to live counterculturally. We don't seek revenge when people wrong us. We don't gossip in the workplace about people that we don't like. We don't let anger consume us if we are wronged. Actually, we learn to live in a way that's different, in a way that's countercultural. And therefore, it speaks all kinds of things around about money and how we do it. Interestingly, you'll be quite surprised that Proverbs actually encourages the accumulation of wealth. It says actually if you've got wealth, you can influence people, you can do things for it. It's a really, really good thing to have. You don't have to borrow and you're not begging, and it's really, really good. It commends wealth. And yet it also says, don't depend on your wealth. Because if you depend on your wealth, then actually the wealth has become there in front of God. It says, if it's a problem that you're depending on it, give it all away. Accumulate, give it away. Proverbs says 2 different things. But actually it's about trusting God and knowing what's right for us. And that's why we need that wisdom to discern. What does it look to live rightly before God? With my wealth, with my friends, with the day-to-day decisions, with our sexual ethics, with the way we think about politics and what's going on in our world. What it's saying is, trust in the Lord. Don't think you know it all. Actually, he's given us his wisdom. And of course, supremely in Jesus, when we get to the New Testament, John tells us what? He is the Logos, he is the Word, he is the wisdom of God. That's why we need to understand wisdom, because it's about how we live for Jesus. And so, having understood what it is and why it's important, then how do we respond to wisdom? There are just a few simple steps that we can do. 1 verse 3 says, receive instruction. We're never too old to learn. There's lots of things about that. It's not just for youngsters. 1 verse 5 says, listen. Let the wise listen and add to their learning. Let the discerning get guidance. What they're saying there is, look, you're never too old, you're never too young. Learn and keep learning. Wisdom isn't like a box that once you filled it, then that's it, you've got your complete box of wisdom. It says, no, actually, it's something that continues to fill and fill and fill. It's really, really important that we learn how to do it right. But it's more than just listening and receiving instruction, being moldable. It's about wanting it too. Do not forget my teaching, chapter 3, verse 1, but keep my commands in your hearts. It's saying, God, it's really, really important that it's in you, that it touches you, it's making a difference in your life. But more than that, it's wanting it, but it's keeping hold of it. I don't know whether to call this keeping hold or remembering or whatever, but 3 verse 3 says this, bind them, talking about the words of wisdom, bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart. I love that idea of the tablet of your heart, something which speaks about who you are as a person. And of course, what Jesus taught us is, do you remember that? When he says, it's not what goes into you that makes you unclean, it's what comes out of you that makes you unclean. And then he goes on and says, actually, because what comes out of you reflects what's in your heart. It's drawn from wisdom and Proverbs, that teaching. He is saying, understand, be wise, and write it on the tablet of your heart. Let it shape you, so that people know who you are and who you are living for. Let it flow through everything that you do, at home, in the workplace, at school, wherever you are. And of course also it encourages perseverance. 3, 11 and 12. My son, don't despise the Lord's discipline and don't resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son he delights in. What it's saying is that it's hard going at times. There are lots of things that we need to learn. There's lots of areas in which we need to grow, and it will be hard work. But stick with it, because God loves us. And if at times he challenges us and if he makes us learn things, then that's because he loves us. And wisdom is one of the ways in which we know that and can see that. And it's so important because it's who we are. It shapes who we are. And that's why we need it. It's about living well. Do you remember in 1 Peter 3 where it says, be prepared to give an answer to those who ask for the hope that you have in you? Translated into proverb language, if people see you living well and living rightly and wisely, they're going to want to know, what is the source of this wisdom? Well, of course, the answer is Jesus. It opens the door, doesn't it, to have those conversations about the Logos, the wisdom of God, personified in Jesus, explored in the book of Proverbs. So that's our hope as we look into the various different bits and bobs over the next few weeks, that we'll look at some very, very practical things, but above all, that it will enable us to live well in right relationship with God and right relationship with one another.